Today is lecture 8. Okay, so we'll continue protein secondary structure. Okay, so we have really talked about many different secondary structure elements. Let me share the slides. We talked about many different protein secondary structures, namely alpha helix, ketone helix, pi helix, antiparallel beta sheet, parallel beta sheet. And when it comes to loops, beta turn loops, right? And so in addition to that, if there are structures called random coils, means that let's see if a secondary structure, okay, how do you characterize a secondary structure? So you can actually map the phi and psi, okay, on a Ramachandran map. And if a set of phi and psi for a stretch of amino acids falls into, for example, alpha helical region, then it is alpha helix. A set of consecutive phi and psi of peptide stretch falls into, let's say, antiparallel beta sheet, then you have antiparallel beta sheet. Okay, so when we say secondary structure, this is basically continuous stretch of amino acids having the phi psi of a secondary structural element. But if I, let's say if you have a peptide of amino acid 1, 2, 3, and 4, okay, so then phi psi of A1 falls into alpha helix, and phi psi of this falls into, let's say, beta sheet. Then this falls into, let's say, pi helix, and so on and so forth. Then you don't have a single structural element propagating from one end to the other end of this peptide. So then you don't have a unique secondary structural elements. Phi psi can really fall into regions other than these designated regions on Ramachandran plot. Then you call that structure is actually random coil, because then phi and psi of consecutive amino acids does not belong to, okay, are sets of phi psi, okay, do not belong to a designated region, do not fall on a designated regions on Ramachandran plot. Okay, in other words, to say something is random coil, you have a random sets of phi and psi. Okay, so they don't really belong to this. Okay, so these are the major secondary structural elements. Okay, and in all these things, only the dihydrous we are varying, and peptide bond is trans. Okay, is mostly trans. Okay, because that's the most stable, so that the side chains have less clash. But however, when it comes to proline, okay, proline has an interesting amino acids, side chain connected back to the backbone. Connected back to backbone. So that's very uniqueness. So this restricts what phi and psi it can form. Like we said that proline typically does not exist between an alpha helix, because then the helix doesn't really propagate. There is a kink. And typically proline again doesn't fall in beta strands, because again you have a kink it doesn't really propagate. But in addition to that, so proline can form on beta turns. Okay, so shown here, for example, like proline is very unique. If you want to really bend a sharp bend, let's say in anti-parallel beta strand hairpin. Okay, but other interesting property of proline is that, so now the peptide bond can be in cis. Okay, cis as well as trans, not as well as. Either this can be cis or trans, and the probability of having proline in cis is very likely. If you really open the PDB structures, and if you map all prolines, so more or less proline can have almost with equal certainty with cis and trans, and this is an important parameter, especially in protein folding. Okay. Okay. So, for example, in the protein folding, the unfolded peptide can be in cis and trans, but the folded conformation might be stable only, let's say, if proline belongs to either cis or trans. So, in this case, once the protein folds, the proline needs to really change its backbone cis and trans stance to either exclusive to cis or trans, and this is a very slow step. Okay, cis to trans or trans to cis, okay, vice versa. It is very slow process. Okay. So this is a big concern for protein folding people. Okay, so if an unfolded peptide chain needs to form, so then typically the rate limiting step is proline isomerization or cis trans isomerization. Okay, so this can take milliseconds to seconds time scale. So often people say that, okay, if you have a proline which is in wrong conformation, then you need this process to occur, then only the folding is complete. Okay, that's from the protein folding. We'll come there when we discuss about protein folding. Okay, so because of now this and cis and trans, okay, so proline gets actually very interesting structures. Okay, the slide I'm showing here, imagine if you have a polyproline, polypeptide consisting of entirely proline residues. Okay, polyprolines. So then you can have all prolines, okay, either all cis or all trans. Okay, so get very interesting structures. So what I'm showing on the left side, if you imagine the cis proline is in cis conformation. So where is the peptide bond? So basically that's your nitrogen of this is C alpha. So this is the N terminus and this is the C terminus, the backbone connected to nitrogen. So this is the peptide bond we are talking about. So this is basically C, CO and H. Okay. Sorry. So we are talking about the penultimate one. So with the previous amino acid. So you have actually CO and H. Okay, NH is not H because it's connected to the side chain. So now this is in cis because this C alpha and this C alpha are on the same side of peptide bond. So this is a conformation. But you can have this C alpha on the other side of the peptide bond, or this C alpha and C alpha are on different sides of this peptide bond. So this is a trans conformation. This is actually all the amino acids exist. So let's say now if you have all prolines in polyproline or in cis conformation, and if you build a structure, this is how actually it will look like. Okay, so this is a side view, and the same thing if you see from the top, this is what you are really looking at. Okay, so the red is CO. Okay, so this is oxygen. Blue is blue is actually nitrogen. Nitrogen on the this this cyclic ring. Okay, so what are the properties? So this is a right-handed helix. So cis-proline is okay, right-handed. Just like alpha helix is right-handed. But if all prolines are in trans, shown on the right side, okay? So shown on the right side, so then this is how the structure looks like on the right side, and this is the top view, okay? So this is the left hand, okay? So this right hand and left hand is due to the backbone cis-trans isomerization. It's not due to any side chain thing. And if you see, so this is called P1, right-handed called P polyproline 1, and then all trans is called PP2 or polyproline 2. Okay, PP1 and PP2. And you see, this is short in terms of, let's say, if you take certain number of residues. Okay, so this is short and fat, and this is long and thin, okay, comparatively. And the handedness is opposite, and the number of residues is kind of 10 residues per term, and this is exactly 3 residues per term, okay. And if you see from the top, the right side trans, you see almost like every fourth one is actually overlapping with the first one, so on and so forth. So that's why you see kind of symmetric fan kind of thing, which only looking at the top view only 3. So it's basically perfect 3 residues per turn. But this one is basically 10 residues per 3 turn or 3.3 residues per turn. So this is basically slightly offset. Every fourth one is slightly offset along the axis with respect to the first one. You see that's why kind of nicely spanning or spreading if you see from the top. Okay, so these are the interesting structures which are actually taken only by polyproline and very unique to this. That's mainly because of the cis-trans isomerization. Other amino acids.
Can I ask a question, sir?
Yeah.
So
Yes,
that 5-member ring, the puckeredness of the 5-member ring has anything to do with the right-handed or left-handed? If we change the that carbon atom which is out of plane, if we change the direction, means coming out of the plane to going into the plane, does it change the that right-handedness or left-handedness?
Yeah, so it doesn't really change much as you see. Okay, so these are the side chain. For example, if you take this side chain versus this side chain, okay, so they are not really repelling with each other. There is no steric clash or anything. But mainly the bonding is changing on the backbone only. So the puckeredness doesn't really have much effect. Okay, they can have slightly different things. Okay, so that brings me to what is a stabilizing force in alpha helix or pi helix or 310 helix or 210
So I
helix?
have one question. Sir,
Yeah.
why is that phosphorylated?
Phosphorylated?
If there's a phosphate group attached to the.
Oh, that's only one. Okay, that just to okay. Don't worry about that group. So I'm showing only one amino acid just to indicate cis and trans. Okay, but in the polyproline, phosphorylation is not there. Okay, that's basically structure I have taken somewhere else just to show that how the cis trans along the peptide bond. Okay, no phosphorylation. Sorry. Don't worry. Okay, so what is the stabilizing force? When we say alpha helix, pi helix, 310 or 27 or anti-parallel beta strand, beta parallel strand, what is the stabilizing force? What is the main stabilizing force? Or the common stabilizing force?
Hydrogen bonding interaction.
Hydrogen bonding. Right? And where this hydrogen bonding occurs? Between
into I2, I plus 4.
Okay. So
I2, I plus 4.
Yeah, so the backbone gives hydrogen bonding strength. So NH coming from one backbone position to another position, right? Hydrogen bonding. But here, if you see, if you see, do you see any of that kind of bonding here? Okay. So, and you don't really see because this is CO, this is NH, the same peptide bond, of course, it cannot form. But it doesn't matter whether it is I plus 1, I plus 2, I plus 3, I plus 4, nowhere there is no hydrogen bond. Okay. So the stabilization force, okay, hence in this PP1 or PP2 is not hydrogen bond. Okay. And it's basically mostly the structure is actually because of the restriction of the peptide bond where the C alphas need to be on opposite or the same side. Okay, that's the only restriction. And very weak stabilization force comes from what is called N-pi interaction. That's from the peptide bond. Okay.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sir, all the in the proline ring, all the including the nitrogen and all the carbon, are they in the same plane in the ring, or they are puckered in the right handed and left handed? In the right handed and left handed, the ring is puckering, or they all the carbon and the nitrogen are in the same plane of the ring?
No. So basically, all 5 atoms, okay, of this ring are not in the same plane. That's clearly you can see on both structures. Okay. So one atom needs to be out of plane. Okay. So it could be either, for example, okay, so it's difficult to see on the board. So it could be this atom here, all other 4 on the plane, but this atom is out of plane. See, on the other hand here, so this atom is out of plane, all other 4 in the thing. Okay, so this is basically puckered. All atoms are not in the same plane, but that's not going to really dictate, okay? So dictate your backbone because it can be this atom or this atom can be puckered, okay? But the what structure is actually contributing to the backbone is basically nitrogen and the C alpha. That's all. Okay, all the other 3 atoms can actually adjust, okay, such that the ring is in stable form, and definitely puckering occurs. Puckering means that all 5 atoms are not in the same plane, and see typically one of the C in the backbone, okay, in the cycle is off the plane. Okay, that's not really contributing. Okay, the main contributing force is basically restricting cis substance. Okay, so the stabilizing force in this case is basically kind of N2 pi star of the backbone only. So backbone has, you have typically when pi bonds, you talk about pi star, okay, N pi star, right? So in this case, the backbone stabilization is kind of N2 pi star, but it's not as strong as you can see the hydrogen bonding of, let's say, any other helical structures. Okay, that's just to basically complete that fluorine is a unique amino acid and which can have these structures. And if you see any proline stretch,
Sir,
okay,
can you repeat once again which N2 pi star? And this is
on the backbone, you have actually peptide bond, right?
yes.
Yeah, so backbone is actually peptide bond. So you can have N2 pi star transitions, okay? So or N2 pi star interactions. So actually when you shine the light, so this is one of the ways actually you use peptide bond structures in optical spectroscopy to identify what secondary structural elements are present in especially circular dichroism spectroscopy, because the backbone has a handedness. So you have a beautiful polarized, if you use polarized like left circularly polarized or right circularly polarized, other differences, you can actually use that characteristic property in identifying which secondary structural elements. Okay, so that's actually completes secondary structural elements, why proline is actually very unique. Okay, so far we talked about all properties typically derived from natural amino acids. Okay, so 20 amino acids, you can build your own peptide, you can take these peptides from proteins, and then you can actually analyze secondary structural elements like helices, strands, sheets, parallel sheets, anti-parallel sheets, and etc. Right? Okay, but one interesting protein is collagen. Collagen, yeah. Yeah.
So for orthographies,
Mm-hmm.
we form the left-handed helix.
Mm-hmm.
So can I consider it similar to the treated helix other than the handed helix?
No. No, because where you are talking about phi and psi. Okay, so phi and psi belong to a certain region. Okay, so that brings back. Okay, then I'll show. Let me see. Let me go to hydrogen.
So what was the question? We couldn't hear the question.
So the question was that because you see on the board. Okay, you don't see the board. Okay. So is there any way to switch between board and this? Okay. So on the board, I have taken polychlorine, all trans is left-handed and all cis is right-handed. So this left-handed, is it similar to alpha helix? Sorry, let's say 310 helix. For that matter, any of the helices. Okay. So that's the question. Okay, because it's a 3 residues per turn, right? But this is different from 310 helix because in 310 helix you have phi and psi fall on a certain regions on Ramachandran plot, right? That's because of dihedrals around Cl, but the peptide bond is in trans. Here the peptide bond is in trans, okay, but phi psi you have to now worry about where exactly their phi psi. So I'll show you where exactly the phi psi is actually you map onto Ramachandran plot, and you'll surprisingly see differences. Okay, so do you share screen again? Yeah. Okay, so you see 2 here. Okay, so that Roman number 2. No, this is a parallel beta sheet. This is anti-parallel beta sheet. This is polyproline 2 helix. Okay. So if you see phi psi of 310 helix, somewhere here, and then PP1 is also very similar here. Okay, so PPT is actually most elongated, and this. Okay, so this is an important point. So when we talk about Ramachandran plot, we assume all amino acids typically for other structure character like helices or thing. Peptide bond is in trans. Okay, so now let's say if you take a polypeptide chain and you manually switch to cis and then keep the same phi sign, then you might find at a different region. Okay, so that's good. And PP2 is actually false here. Okay, that's good point. Okay. All trans.
And all other amino acids are also kind of all trans. How does per residue stabilization energy? Let's say if I make an all trans thing out of this alanine.
Okay.
The same thing I just mapped it instead of PP2 I do alanine. Then how does the stabilization energy compare as if we take one of the commonly available helicals which we cannot.
Okay, so this stabilization energy comes from, one is actually the structural properties, another is stability. So if you take this peptide, so then solvent comes an important property. Okay, so certain structures are stable in aqueous environment, some structures are stable in kind of alcohol environment or non-polar. Okay, so PP1 and PP2. So PP2 is stable in water. But now let's say if you want to convert to same polyproline to all cis. So what you need to do is that you need to actually add slowly alcohol to this. So if you add, let's say 30% alcohol to water mixture or 30% or higher alcohol, then you begin to switch the trans bonds to cis so that this structure is actually stable. Okay. So this is actually the stability comes solvent dependence in this. Or in other words, other secondary structural elements in larger proteins, the stability comes from what's going to be in the neighborhood, other peptide chains, backbone or side chains, versus how much it will be exposed to the aqueous environment. So this is always basically kind of interplay between the environment where the structure is going to stay. Okay, so in other words, to put, this is only stable in water, but this is stable in alcohol. Okay, so in that sense, now if you have to ask the stabilization energy, so that you have to take solvent interaction. Okay, okay, so that's good point. So PP2, though it is left-handed, so for right-handed, left-handed, so falls here, and then PP1 is also actually falls somewhere here. I forgot. It's not presented here, but it should be here. Okay, so let's come back to.
Sir, I have a question that we are dealing with the beta strand are parallel and anti-parallel in their protein structures. Can the protein structure have mixed beta strands like some of them have parallel?
Oh yeah. So maybe I'll show one of the structures. There is actually, let me see before I forget. So this is a structure you see labeled titin I27. See, this strand and this strand are actually parallel beta strand. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so this red ones. Okay, so the long red one and the one below, I'm pointing out. Okay, so these two are parallel beta strands. So they are parallel to each other. But if you see the blue one and the red one I'm showing you, this is the hairpin.
Yes,
obviously, sir. If something forms hairpins, they have to be anti-parallel. So it's possible that you can have sheets of mixed beta and alpha. Okay, so collagen. So let's come back to collagen. So collagen is an important protein, okay? So which is present in your connective tissue. Okay, connective tissue, extracellular matrix, extracellular matrix. So in the initial classes, we talked about everything inside the cell, nucleus, other organelles, mitochondria, anything which is bounded by cytoplasmic membrane. But in multicellular organisms like us, okay, so you need to communicate, the cells need to communicate, okay, and also they need to have architecture, depending on which tissue. So the molecules which actually build this connection, okay, or communication between the cells is because of there is a matrix, okay, outside the cells where actually cells are embedded. So that's actually extracellular matrix, okay. So the protein which makes of extracellular matrix is actually collagen. So it's a very important protein. And it is actually present in other places like bone, you have this, okay, tendons. Let's say if you have a muscle, which is a tissue connected to bone, okay, you have what are called tendons. Okay, so tendons. So you have actually tissue which connects bone to muscle, so that muscle can actually stretch, but bone is very stiff. So where actually collagen is there. Okay, so anything which you really think of like nose, if you see, so you have bone, but at the end of the nose you have flesh, little stiff but not as stiff as bone. Okay, so and you have ear, you know, which has a certain shape, but you don't have a bone here. So all this is actually cartilage. So this is actually mostly collagen is part of these tissues. Okay, and if you see roughly by, if you take about the all protein content in the body, so roughly 25% to 35% is collagen. So it shows that how important is actually this protein. Okay, so which is actually given less importance than other proteins like enzymes when we talked about, but collagen is absolutely very important protein. And Ramachandran actually spent a lot of his time actually working on collagen structure. Okay, so what is so specific about collagen? So collagen, interestingly, despite that this is a large amount of protein, okay, in the body, so it contains a lot of glycine. Okay, so every third amino acid, okay, every third amino acid is a glycine in collagen peptide. Basically, 33% of amino acid content is collagen. Okay, glycine, and then comes actually proline. Proline is next important amino acid. which contributes to roughly 20%. Okay, not 20%. Yeah, 20%. 20%. Okay, but proline consists of proline and what you call hydroxyproline. Okay, so naturally you have natural amino acid is proline. So then somehow you have to actually convert these prolines to some amino acids. You make modifications. These are called post-translational modifications. We talked about adding a sugar, glycosylation, adding a phosphate, okay, phosphorylation, or adding even entire protein like ubiquitin, ubiquitination. So like that, there are certain modifications actually do occur on amino acids. And a very important modification on proline is hydroxyproline. Okay, so there is a fifth position. So this is actually 4-hydroxyproline. Okay, so if you take the side chain of proline, okay, so that's your thing, and that's proline, so NH, and so let's say okay, so that's C alpha, and this is proline, right? So if you substitute this position OH, then this is actually hydroxyproline. So this is an important modification, and roughly this is 12.6%. Okay, and this is about 9%. Okay, so 9% of the entire content hydroxyproline, and roughly 12% is proline. So together roughly 50%. And if you add these two, already you have 50%. Okay, 50% of your collagen content is just glycine and proline. Okay, and another major elements is that alanine is again 10%, and glutamic acid is also about 9%. Okay, so roughly now just 4 amino acids, okay, consists of about 70%. Okay, so again shows that the complexity is little less in terms of amino acid content, because you have 20 amino acids out of 22 or 50%, and then if you add another 2, then you have basically more or less a protein, and the remaining are basically fractional. Okay, so then this brings up, if you have every third amino acid is glycine guaranteed, okay, and every fifth amino acid is proline guaranteed, then you can really think of unique structures. Okay, what this might actually bring in. Okay, so this is a okay, so then I'll share you slides again so that I'll show. I mean,
The rest of hydrophobic, that can be understood.
yeah, but this is exposed outside glutamic acid. Okay, and okay, so this is a structure. What I'm showing you on left side top panel shows basically triple helix. So collagen is a triple helix protein. Okay, so basically 3 helices. 3 helices, okay, together. Okay, these are called R3 alpha chains. Mind you, alpha chains, not alpha helices. Okay, so each helix each helix is left-handed. Each helix is left-handed. Then 3 such helices come together to form superhelix. Okay, so on the picture which is shown is that on the left side, 1 helix that's left-handed, you can really see. As you move from the bottom to top, you have to actually have left-handed. Okay, And then and the middle picture shows the space filling model of one chain. But now three such chains come together, or three such alpha chains come together to form a super helix. This is called collagen. Okay, triple helix. So single strand, triple coil, or central base. Okay, so now if you see from the top, okay, this triple helix, and what you see at the core or at the center is exclusively glycine. Okay, so the glycine actually packs to the center. So every third amino acid, see, which is thing, and again, glycine is every 33%, right? But there is a sequence. Okay, so typically glycine X proline, okay, glycine X hydroxyproline, or glycine proline X. Okay, so this is the kind of sequences you have, triads. Okay, so almost every third you fix it. The next one, if you put any other amino acid, then you put immediately hydroxyproline. But if you put just a proline next to glycine, then you have any other amino acid. So it shows that basically satisfies that you have very high glycine content and very high proline content. The remaining are less. So if you see this triple helix from the top, now you can understand why glycine is actually very important.
So what is
The
X?
core-
X can be
X can be any other amino
okay.
acid. Okay, so you can have a remaining 18 amino acids like alanine, glutamic acid, everything.
Okay.
So you can actually take more or less any other amino acid, maybe slightly higher the percentage for alanine and glutamic acid. But
Okay.
interestingly, if you bring build this triple helix, now glycine is coming from every chain. Okay, kind of forms the inner core.
Okay.
And what's the specific thing about glycine? The shortest side chain possible. So you can have nice packing. Okay, short. Okay, tight packing can really occur so that you have all the helices brought together as close to as possible. Okay, so then of course you have interchain hydrogen bonds and whatnot, and further stabilization comes really. On the right side, the pictures actually shown are real collagen fibers. Okay. On the right side, I'm showing real collagen fibers. Okay. So these fibers, you see, a very kind of ridge structure. Okay. So you have striations like marks and equidistant. So each chain, the picture given at the bottom, okay, shows that how these individual triple helices are actually bonded together to form a fibril, okay, collagen fibril. So now individual collagens, triple helices bonded to each other through cross links, okay, collagen fibers, and there are cross links between triple helices. Okay, so there are rigid cross links. So what are these cross links? These cross links can be, okay, very interestingly, so these individual triple collagen molecules, okay, are tropocollagen means that individual chains are called tropocollagen, one chain, and if three chains are forming triple coil, then it is collagen. Okay, so single chain form is collagen. So these are really long. It can be as long as kind of 0.3 micron long, and the diameter is like 1.5 nanometer. Okay, so and what are these cross links which are actually shown in yellow there? Okay, these are cross links. Okay, so which actually I indicated earlier. What are the post-translation modifications actually are? So this is a structure like lysine cross-link which I'm showing. So this is actually prevalent in collagen. So now that amino acid X, if it is lysine, then you have side chain CH2, 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 NH3 coming from two other amino acids. And then you can actually make a cross link by in the end removing small moieties from both sides so that you have a rigid cross link. and this is covalent cross-link, you know. So then stability really increases. So it shows that once you have this connective tissue, it's a kind of, okay, lasts really long time. Okay, so you can't just really replace this entirely. Okay, so this is extracellular. Okay, so once this protein is actually made in cells called fibroblasts. Okay, fibroblasts are the cells which make collagen and then excrete, and then once it's excreted outside the cells, it forms nice collagen fibers, and then that gives you rigidity to your tissues, and then gives stability to joints like muscle, bone, and etc. etc. Okay, so that actually brings nicely, sums up all the secondary structural elements which we can really think of. Okay, think of finding in proteins, which could consist of kind of every protein has a unique sequence, but yet you can have secondary structural elements which might be common, and they have their properties can be characterized in terms of mainly phi and psi, and then you can map them onto Ramachandran plot. And sometimes you bring in other elements like cis-trans isolation, you can really bring. So all the elements which we are showing on the Ramachandran plot here. Okay, so anti-parallel, parallel beta strand sheets, collagen, polypropylene 2 helix, C for collagen. So now phi psi of this amino acids in collagen alpha chain, okay, is actually false here. Okay, okay, though it is helix, okay, you see it's basically in the region where you are expecting sheets, means that these are really elongated, and alpha, pi, and 310 belong to a different region. And then this is the right-handed helices, and alpha L is actually left-handed alpha helix. Okay, so that gives you now, I think, more perspective about Ramachandran plots and a little bit more details and etc. Okay.
Sir, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Just a general inquiry. Sir, we know that the different amino acids with the different properties from the proteins in the secondary structures. So I want to ask that we know that in this, let's say, collagen, so glycine is 33%. It is forming tight hydrogen bond short chain. That's okay. The structural form of every amino acid helps to different proteins, we know, but in working function of the protein, how the every amino acids work, we can know, but how they influence, because every protein have different amino acids. Let's say if the glycine is favorable for collagen to work. If glycine is not there, structure will be deformed, but collagen somehow can work. Because I mean, amino acid how influence the work of a protein. They must influence the structure, we know, but is they influence the work of also in a microscopic scale? I want to know that every amino acid how they.
Well, 20 amino acids, naturally occurring amino acids, you have different side chains, right? Sometimes you have functional groups which can undergo acid-base equilibrium, like glutamic acid, a lysine. Okay, sometimes they can protonated or histidine. So there actually acid-base equilibrium properties are important, and how they might be, whether interacting with the solvent or interacting with other amino acids on the same peptide. Or sometimes these amino acids directly involved in chemical reactions, or sometimes these amino acids are actually involved in just provide a rigid architecture, a framework, okay, so that an organism has a certain structure. So looks like glycine and alanine, these functional groups are not really reactive. Glycine just hydrogen, alanine has a small CH3. These are not really reactive, but they provide structural rigidity. Okay. Looks like glycine is very important because it's a shortest side chain, so that you have 3 chains come together to as close to as possible. Imagine now putting in terms of glycine here, if you put bulky CH3, then you might have this triple helix might form, but might not be as rigid as or as tight as right now with glycine. So some amino acids purely for structural reasons, for example, like glycine here. But if you go to enzymes, you say what is called active site. Then you say, what are the residues I have at the active site? Okay, I have a cysteine, which might act as a nucleophile for reaction. I have an acid side chain, which might actually form hydrogen bond and maybe push and pull protons from substrate to one substrate to another substrate, and so on and so forth. So basically, we have to see the functionality of amino acids in the context of where they are present in polypeptides and proteins are important. So it's impossible to generalize, but the generalization I have given is that, for example, like acid-base equilibrium undergoing side chains which purely provide hydrophobic environment. For example, like typically if you take proteins, tryptophans are typically at the center. They provide nice large hydrophobic surface area, which can begin a nucleation of a folding or collapse process, etc. So we will talk about those, I mean, as across the course, but we can't really generalize. But yes, every side chain every amino acid has a side chain, which more or less either provides a structural reason or it's a functional reason where it might participate in interactions and reactions. Okay. Okay. So that basically sums up secondary structure. So we talked about primary structure, nothing but the sequence of polypeptide.
I have one question. So from the
Yes.
previous slide,
Mm-hmm.
the black and white image on the right, is that TEM of collagen crystals?
No, I wouldn't say really crystal. These are fibers.
Okay.
Okay.
So-
Crystal, I mean, these are typically you talk about atomic arrangement, how the atoms are arranged, but this is not crystal. I would say this is fibril. Just like
So was
any.
there a medium? Was there a medium to put them, or they were at such means they were stored in a medium?
No. So you don't have to. So like I said, you take any tissue, you solubilize all cells. What's remaining outside is extracellular matrix. So you have actually this matrix is full of these collagen fibers. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And then basically these are not tightly packed. Any other element, any other proteins, some other proteins are also present in the matrix. All of them are actually removed. And then these are basically sparsely dispersed fibrils, okay, which are actually shown under this. And interestingly, this image actually shows how two fibrils can actually cross-link. At the top, you see there's a cross structure. You see, these are not just sitting on top of each other. There might be cross-links, okay, cross-links between fibrils. So what we talked about, how the fibril is formed by many collagen triple helices shown at the bottom, mainly because of, let's say, lysine cross link, or hydroxyproline, which provides nice hydrogen bonding. Okay, could be occurring between triple collagen, etc. Okay, but I don't think it's really crystalline. Okay, these are fibers. Okay, so so now we move to how these secondary structural elements. Okay, so you have a long polypeptide chain, for example, 100 amino acids. Not all 100 amino acids will form entirely alpha helix or entirely beta sheet. Okay, but some parts might form some secondary structural elements, for example, alpha helix. Some other stretch might form a different structural element, beta sheet. And it's possible that in proteins, okay, many different types of secondary structural elements formed by different peptide segments now can interact, okay, with each other to place themselves relatively with respect to each other, okay, in any given protein, now gives rise to tertiary structure. Okay, so okay, so putting together secondary structure. Okay, so secondary structure is basically putting together secondary structure. Okay, so let's say if I have to write a primary sequence. Okay, so N-terminus, let's say N-terminus. Let's say you start with typically methionine is the first amino acid which is synthesized by the proteins, by the ribosomes. Okay, then you have, let's say, alanine, glycine, glutamic acid, okay, tryptophan, and serine, cysteine, name it like this. Okay, so let's say alanine, okay, phenylalanine, glutamic acid, aspartic acid. Okay, so that's C-terminus. So this is a primary sequence. Okay, so now this primary sequence, imagine, let's say this short stretch forms a beta strand. Okay, and then this short stretch forms alpha helix, and then this short stretch form might another beta strand, but short, and then maybe it forms, okay, another helix, and then this might form, okay, another, let's say, okay, so this is now secondary structure. So you have in the long polypeptide chain, some stretches form standard secondary structures. Let's say initial one, this is a beta strand. So only we will know whether it will form a parallel beta sheet or anti-parallel only when another strand is placed adjacent to this. If it is another strand is placed in this direction from left to right, then you call a parallel beta sheet. But let's say another beta strand which is coming from right to left in the direction, then it will form an anti-parallel beta sheet. But sometimes you don't have to have another beta strand. So single beta strand can stabilize in rare cases, but coming from different stabilization. But this stretch forms, let's say, alpha helix. Okay, so this stretch of peptide for amino acids, this peptide purely form alpha helix, and then this stretch forms again beta. Okay, so beta 1, beta 2, and then let's say this helix is different from this. Okay, imagine stout one. So let's say, for the sake of calling 5 helix, and this beta strand beta 3, and then anything which is between secondary structural elements have phi which do not really belong to any category on the Ramachandran plot. So now you can call a random call. Okay. Sometimes these short elements can form beta turn. Okay. So let's say you are sharply bending that beta strand. Okay. Are basically for the sake of putting another beta strand. Okay, so then you can have beta turn. Beta turn actually sharply bends. So now you have many secondary structural elements in the same polypeptide. We know if I ask you the properties of this alpha helix, you will give me exactly what is phi psi and etc. Which is hydrogen bonded with what and how exactly the side chains might be lying outside, right? So now we know individual secondary structural elements, but how they are placed with respect to each other, okay, gives you tertiary structure. Okay, so relative placement I call. Relative placement. Okay, so now I'll show you the structures. It's impossible to draw, but it's always easy to grab a protein and then show you because these are lovely pictures. So you see on the left side, it's a protein called myoglobin. which you know that is important in binding oxygen and transporting oxygen. You see beautifully right away. Can you guys tell me what are the secondary structural elements which it has?
In myoglobin, all alpha helices are there. In
Yes.
my
Mini helices, the blue helix,
the
okay,
green.
Yes, beta
green,
helix.
orange, yellow, cyan, and whatnot. There are a couple of helices, 5 or 6 helices. Okay.
Sir, I have a question that you said the only one.
Wait. So individual helices are alpha helices. Okay, so you know the properties, but how they're actually positioned with respect to each other gives rise to its unique protein structure. Now we call this protein structure of myoglobin. So unless you place all these helices in this relative placement, so we do not have a myoglobin structure. You can't really place randomly. Okay, so now why this set is stable, or this relative positions and orientation is stable? Because now we bring in the thing which we haven't really talked a lot is side chains. Okay, when we have written the alpha helix structure, we said that 313 helix, so that every 13 the 13 atoms in the loop, but we said R1, R2, R3, R4 side chains, we never bothered. Now those side chains will come into picture of individual alpha helices. Now they're actually interacting, intra-helical interactions, and now because of the side chains which are completely on the outside of every helix. Every helix, all the side chains are outside. None of them are inside. So now these side chains actually interact with each other in a way we cannot really predict a priori. Okay, for proteins even today, only we can actually guess based on the empirical laws, and gives rise to this tertiary structure. Okay, what was the question? Who was asking?
Sir, I am asking that you said that only a beta strand can be present in a protein folding structure. If another beta strand does not exist there, so how the stabilizations can occur?
No, you can have structures what are called helix, beta helix, or beta helix beta. So in those structures, actually, you can have 2 helices with 1 beta strand, or you can have 2 beta strands with 1 helix. Okay, these are possible. Okay, these are not impossible structures, but typically large proteins tend to have sheets. Okay, so that's completely alpha, right? Myoglobin, very interesting. Of course, you have prosthetic group of porphyrin. Okay, so that's basically post-translational modifications or non-amino acid elements. But if you move to the structure at the middle, okay, called titin I27, what are the secondary structural elements which are present in this protein?
Beta sheets are there.
Exactly. So this entire protein is actually made up of mostly beta strands, and then of course loops, but almost zero alpha, zero helical stretches you see. Means that the protein is entirely made up of beta strands. And then of course these strands are actually placed together, which pair you see, some pairs are parallel, some pairs are anti-parallel. So it shows that you can have sheets where you can have a parallel beta sheet, okay, as well as anti-parallel beta sheet, okay. Okay, so you can have structures like this. So these two are parallel. Okay, so these two, if I see parallel, and if I do these two anti-parallel. Okay, so you can have in the same sheet, okay, mixed beta sheet. Okay, so in the mixed beta sheet, you can have strands both parallel and anti-parallel. It's really possible. So this is a real example, which clearly shows that this thing. Okay, so second thing is that, so if you see carefully, so the central structure, you have actually strands which are in front, and then there are certain strands which are actually behind. You see? Okay, so these are called now beta sheets, and 2 beta sheets. One is actually different, one is at the back, actually they overlap. So this is called a beta sandwich structure. Okay, so you can have a beta sandwich. Okay, so just so you see the front, you can have these strands. Okay, blue, red. Okay, that's it. 3 strands, and the back another blue, another red. Okay, and these two, these actually strands form each other, 2 sheets, and then these 2 sheets. Okay, so these sheets. So basically, this is one sheet. Okay, but I can have another sheet. Okay, before that, forming it could be mixed or purely parallel, anti-parallel. Now this sheet actually interacts with one on the board. Okay, so now beta strand structures, if you remember, alternate amino acids. Okay, so it's basically towards you, but the one actually into the board, and next amino acid you have side chain towards you, but next side chain is into the board. So like that, you have in the sheet, half the side chains actually point towards you, half the side chains point towards into the board. Now imagine if you have 2 sheets, then you have for each sheet, half the residues from each sheet actually pointing towards each other. Now imagine, let's say if you want to make a sandwich. Okay, so you can really imagine now what properties of this amino acids should be. If all of them are really hydrophobic, so definitely then they want to really hide from water. So this sandwich now, alternate amino acids of hydrophobic residues can form kind of hydrophobic glue between these side chains. Okay, so now hydrogen bond is stabilized within the sheet, and then you have side chains on let's say hydrophobic surface on one sheet, forming nicely hydrophobic sheet on the other side, will gives rise to, for example, this structure shown in titanium. Okay, so this is a beta sandwich where the amino acids which are packed between the sheets are actually hydrophobic. And of course, sometimes you have to see, so this is actually kind of beta 2 sheets, but it's actually big sheet wound together. Okay, so if you see the edge strands, okay, edge strand is actually interestingly hydrogen bonding, forming a sheet with both sheets. The strand at the bottom, you need to see, look carefully, because it's slightly bent, so that it forms hydrogen bond with this sheet as well as this sheet. So it's basically one sheet kind of bent, you can imagine. Okay, and forming a sandwich, and through stabilization through hydrophobic interaction between the side chains. Okay, so that's purely beta, and then myoglobin is purely alpha, but you can have yeah.
This
Yes.
sandwich can be found by only one beta sheet also. That's what you mentioned right now.
No, exactly. So that brings me to the no, I didn't mention that. Here it is actually one big sheet,
Yes.
bend. Imagine, take a A4 sheet and then bend. Okay, imagine. So then you have one part of the sheet interacting with the other part.
That's like a sandwich only, no? So
It's a sandwich, but what I'm saying is that it's not just 2 independent pieces. Okay, you can have actually connection between these 2 sheets. Again, just beta strand.
what
Okay?
I'm asking is, sir, does both the kind exist? I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Both will exist.
And I'm talking in terms of data, that is it in those sandwiches, the sheets can be parallel or anti-parallel to each other, so there is no
No, okay. So when I mean the sheet, within the sheet, okay, a beta sheet is formed by beta strands.
Yes.
These strands, sense you have to really put in, you say that it's sheet is made up of entirely parallel strands or anti-parallel strands are mixed. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's move to other structure on the extreme right, show name bar star. Okay, what are the secondary structural elements you see in this?
Both the alpha helices and beta strands are there.
Clearly you see like 3 or 4 helices, okay, in pink, and then you have at least, you see 3 strands, okay, forming a beta sheet. if I see clearly, all these three strands are actually parallel with each other. Okay,
Yes, yes.
forming a sheet. Now this sheet is packed against helices. In the previous case, one sheet is actually padded with another sheet, forming a sandwich. But here, one sheet is actually padded with helices. Okay, and the chains on one side of the sheet are interacting with different helices. Okay, and so this is actually mixed alpha beta structure. Sometimes we call alpha beta structure is bar star. And if you see at the bottom called DHFR, dihydrofolate reductase, it's an enzyme. Okay, again you see the cylinders are alpha helices, and then you have actually beta strands actually going from top to bottom. You have to observe very carefully. There are, let me count the strands: 1, strand 2, strand 3, strand 4, strand 5, strand 6, strand 7, strand 8, strand 9. So roughly you have 7 or 8 strands forming a sheet, but the sheet is actually twisted as you go from the top to bottom. Okay, it's a kind of twist is occurring. Okay, so you have to keep in mind that when I say sheet, doesn't mean that it's a completely a planar structure. Okay, there is always even within individual strands are not straight as shown in titin. You see, they're actually bent. You know, strands are almost never really straight. Okay, only in certain condition. But the twist can occur between one strand to another strand, so that the entire sheet, if you move from top to bottom, which is clearly in the case of DHFR, from the top to bottom, it's almost like 90 degrees twist. Okay, in one case this way, bottom strand is completely opposite. Means that a continuous twist can really occur. And on either side, it's padded with alpha helices in DHFR case. Okay, of course, there are two other small substrates are present, and substrate and cofactor are present. So that's basically, again, important for certain proteins like myoglobin. You need porphyrin. And for example, like DHFR, when it is actually functioning, it binds a cofactor, okay, NADPH cofactor, and it binds a substrate called dihydrofolate, so that it can actually function, and it actually carry out a reaction called reduction of dihydrofolate to tetrahydrofolate. Okay, so that again sums up tertiary structure. So tertiary structure is unique between proteins. So it's not that there are rules how a helix should pack with a strand, or how two helices should be placed with respect to each other. Okay, so this is actually protein context. Every protein has a unique orientation. This we call a protein structure. But of course, individual secondary structural elements, you can really identify the elements which are stabilizing, like hydrogen bonding or hydrophobic interactions, which you can put it on to Ramachandran plot. So if you take any of this protein and let's say myoglobin has 150 residues. So if you take all 150 residues, you have 150 sets of phi and psi. Okay, and if you take all these phi psi and put it into Ramachandran plot, more or less except the loops, all are forming alpha helices. So you have all these sets fall onto alpha helix region of the Ramachandran plot. If you take titin I27, it has 90 residues. If you take phi psi of all these 90 residues, map onto a Ramachandran plot, they will fall onto both parallel and anti-parallel beta region. Okay, that's actually whenever someone solves a structure either using X-ray or NMR, first thing is that they do is actually they map the measured phi psi, okay, onto Ramachandran plot, and then see that how many residues are actually violating this. Okay, occasionally you have residues which are violating because the stabilization comes from elsewhere. Okay, there was a question.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Sumant.
For the loops, they are actually the primary structures of the, we can say like it's a primary structure of the amino acids, the loops.
No. So entire protein structure is a primary sequence, is basically sequence of amino acids from the N-terminus to C-terminus. Only the loops, the amino acids or the peptide elements which are forming these loops, sometimes they don't have any fixed geometry. Means that they don't have a fixed alpha, fixed phi and psi. That's all.
Okay, so and sir, are we going to read protein denaturation in further classes? Because I have a question right now about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so sir, myoglobin, you told that it has a specific structure.
Mhm.
So, and it is in water. Suppose I'm changing the solvent, which is less polar than water, then of course the orientations of the alpha helices are going to change.
Yeah.
So, what sort of changes will be considered as denaturation of myoglobin if it carries some other gases other than oxygen?
Okay. So, okay. So that brings me to okay. For example, the structure which I have shown, either myoglobin, alpha helices, or bar star, alpha beta, or I27 beta, or BHFR alpha beta, all the structures which I have shown are exactly how these molecules in their native state. Means native state means that the proteins under physiological conditions, pH 7.4, 150 millimolar sodium chloride, okay, etc. So these proteins adopt that three-dimensional arrangement, which is called a native state. Okay, our native state structure. Means that if you take randomly myoglobin or chitin or pasta from their native arrangement, and if you try to look their structure, that's exactly how it will look like, native state. Because this is in this is at pH 7.4, okay, aqueous, obviously, and then salt conditions is equally important. Okay, phosphate buffer, buffered phosphate is okay, phosphate. Aqueous, obviously, okay, sodium chloride, etc. So these are the conditions, of course. Uh, Physiological conditions means that 37 degrees Celsius, not room temperature. Okay, physiological condition is 37 always. Okay, I mean, we are talking about mammalian system. Okay, okay, and of course, normal pressure, etc. Okay, so this is the conditions. Any protein which adopts a well-defined three-dimensional arrangement of its atoms. Of course, we recognize it to secondary structure. Then it is its native state. So if you are changing conditions from this, okay, change these conditions. Okay, so then the protein might not adapt this native state because some other arrangement might be stable. So change these conditions, we call denaturation. Okay, you're deviating from the native conditions. Okay, and exclusively we call denaturation if you really drive the system to extreme conditions. Okay, to the same now a buffer, you add a lot of urea, for example. Okay, so we are talking about really lot. Okay, so this is like 8 molar urea. Okay, so if you add, then this structure is no longer stable. Okay, so for example, myoglobin has a specific orientation of all the helices. Now imagine this orientation is disrupted. All helices are present, but they are completely dislodged from each other. Then it consists of denaturation. But even helices are not even existent. All helices are actually destroyed, and all the 5' do not really belong to alpha helix, kind of random coil. Then again, it is denatured. But this denaturation can be brought by taking the system away from these native conditions. For example, using urea. Or change pH. pH is 7.4, right? Imagine now pH is brought to, let's say, 1.0. Means this is called pH denaturation. So this is a chemical denaturation. Chemical denaturation. This is a pH denaturation. Now you can think of as a chemist other perturbations. You can actually now, what is the native temperature? Physiological temperature 37. Imagine, let's say you heat this sample to, let's say, 70 degrees Celsius. Thermal denaturation. Okay? Or what I do in my lab is apply force, a stretch. Okay? So this is called mechanical denaturation. So anything which is not natural, okay, if you are imposing on it, okay, anything which is not natural, you are imposing onto the system, then you have this denaturation. Urea, guanidinium hydrochloride, chemical denaturation. Or you can actually use other solvents, other chemicals. Change the pH, extreme high or extreme low. Okay, pH denaturation. Thermal, you can heat thermal denaturation, and you can actually cool. Then also actually proteins denature. Some proteins actually denature if you cool. This is called cold denaturation. Or I can actually apply force to individual protein molecules so that I dislodge. If I am pulling from N-terminus to C-terminus, helices can be dislodged. Okay, so then this is mechanical denaturation.
So
Okay.
can we
Okay, so
Yes.
yes, Suma.
So can we dislodge the helices in our required amount, like if we want to shift it for a particular angstrom, can we do that during the mechanical?
That's actually highly controllable. This, okay. So let's see if you have a protein, okay, which forms, let's say, without sake of there and helix, etc. Okay, and then let's say you have this is N and this is C. Okay, so you have end-to-end distance, let's say some X. Okay, so now you stretch this to, let's say, 10% of X. Okay, X plus 10% of X. Okay, means that slightly this. Okay, if you try to do that, so these interactions. So now the helices, okay, a helix will go here, but then your beta might not be stable here, and this helix is actually mutually extended, right? So these interactions, now you're actually breaking because they are nicely packed, but then you are extending by, let's say, 10% end to end or 20%. Okay, so then there'll be still secondary structures might exist. The tertiary structure is lost. So the moment you lose this tertiary structure, we say that safely that its protein is denatured. Protein is denatured doesn't mean that you have to really destroy the secondary structural elements. So using circular dichroism, you can actually do this. You know, so people do circular dichroism. They look only secondary structural elements. You know, any small changes, for example, done, for example, like if you elongate very little bit, your interactions, original interactions are lost. Okay, new interactions might form, but all the secondary structure might be identical to this. Okay, the fraction of residues which are in the helices or the fraction of residues which are in the beta very similar. But if you measure CD, so CD of the secondary structural elements is identical. So CD doesn't really. But then you have to go to tools or techniques where actually you can actually identify this. And using CD itself, there are something called tertiary reasons one can actually look at to say whether in the denaturation. Okay, so this is extreme case. 8 molar urea is extreme. Okay, but let's say if you use only, let's say let's say only 2 molar, okay, urea. So protein might not denature completely. This is partial denaturation. Partial denaturation. Okay, means that you haven't really disturbed the structure to a larger extent. Okay, but yet you have disturbed the structure from the native state. So it's not native state anymore, but it's partially denatured. So sometimes we call what are called molten globules. So this I talk about when I talk protein folding classes. Okay, molten globule, and it suggests that it's something is molten means that it's like a salt crystal. If you melt it, so okay, so they are not really dispersed like in salt in water, but they're close together. But the refined arrangement with respect to sodium and chlorine, the distance is actually destroyed, right? It's molten. They don't have a fixed distance, unlike in salt, unlike in crystal. Similarly, you can imagine native state is a kind of crystalline, well-defined arrangement, but the molten means that okay, so the individual interactions are destroyed, but they are in the neighborhood. Okay, so where secondary structural elements are identical in molten globules, but their relative arrangement, okay, is disturbed, so gives rise to what's called molten globule. Okay, so if I share the picture, okay, so in all these cases, so you can now think of that any of this three-dimensional arrangement is disturbed, then you say partial denaturation or denaturation. Okay, that answers your question, Suman.
Sir, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Okay, yeah.
when we denaturate, the denaturation can occur in any position abruptly. How can we choose our preferred position of denaturation? Like
Prefer-
partial denaturation, as you say in mechanical?
No. So if you do any methods, what are called ensemble, adding urea, changing pH, increasing or cooling temperature, you won't have any control because different parts of the protein. Okay, so in all these cases, for example, if you use chemicals or pH, anything on the surface is affected. Once the surface is affected, slowly the effect actually goes into center of the molecule. But you won't have any control. You won't have any control which part is affected, which part you can affect. But only in the mechanical denaturation, you can actually initiate where you want to really initiate the unfolding. For example, because it's mechanically, you hold the molecule using 2 points on the surface of the molecule. You can actually change these points at will in principle. Okay, the point of attachment, that point of propagation of force. So this is possible only in mechanical denaturation, both in experiments and computations.
And
Okay.
sir, how we stop that our preferred position? Maybe it hamper next check.
No, but at least you have a control where you want to initiate the effect, perturbation. You know, so but
But
if you
how we stop that? Initiate, I understand, but how we stop that at a particular position
no,
after initiation?
that's only extend. For example, like how much you extend, you want to extend 10%, or you want to extend only 5%, or you want to extend 50%. Okay, so that will actually give you the effect, extent of effect. Okay, so
Sir, one small question, sir.
yeah.
Sir, how we are measuring that, how we're getting to know that our secondary, tertiary structure has been changed? Means, what is the, what? Yeah.
Okay, so now you have to really think of tools. Okay, for example, let's say if you have, let's say very little amount of urea is added to a protein, you can actually use NMR. So NMR will have very nice chemical shifts for amino acids. And then if you see the chemical shifts perturbation, you see which residues are actually affected, which residues are actually affected because of this partial denaturation. Okay, so these chemical shifts actually are very sensitive to the environment of every side chain. Okay, so any small changes occur on because this is residue specific. Okay, but unless you NMR is one of the ways. Actually, X-ray is not possible because you need to have all molecules have identical structure, so you can't really have unfolded molecules. Molecules are partially unfolded molecules having identical structure. It's impossible. So, but NMR, you can really see the chemical residue things. So another way to look is circular dichroism, but it will not give you residue specific information, but it will give you overall changes in the environment at a certain location. For example, let's say if you put a tryptophan at the core of the protein, and then say you have the native information from the native state, but any changes in the tertiary structure changes the environment of tryptophan will give rise to different signal in circular dichroism. So circular dichroism is the tool is one of the ways actually which I use a lot in my lab, can be used to actually get tertiary structural changes. Okay, if you have a fluorescent probe. Okay, so a couple of questions. Is tertiary structure static or dynamic? Okay, this is the biggest question. So we always say nice pictures I have shown you, right? But if you you have to ask the further question, how static is this structure? Because when someone solves a crystal structure, because these are packed molecules, you know, crystalline. Okay, they are packed, so that's why your dynamics is actually lost. Okay, dynamics is very, very minimal. Okay, but in reality, these molecules don't exist as crystals; they are independent. So how static or dynamic? Okay, so it's possible that for larger and larger proteins, you might have loops, okay, shown in all these cases here. So loops might not adopt a well-defined structure, unlike the helical parts, unlike the sandwich parts or beta sheet parts. They might not adopt well-defined structure. So then those loops are not at all static. They are dynamic, means that the loop will not have a fixed orientation as is shown in X-ray or NMR. Okay, loops are flexible. But sometimes some parts of the proteins are also slightly flexible. This is called dynamics, protein dynamics. Okay, so those can be investigated by non-NMR and X-ray techniques. Now, you can really use other spectroscopy methods. Okay, so mainly fluorescence is one of the ways to really see that how dynamic or static is a structure. Another question which you would ask is that study the dynamics by site-specific labeling. Okay, NMR, you can actually put C13, certain residues or all residues C13 and 15 labeled. You can actually get residue level information. That's the beauty of NMR. But overall dynamics, if you can be gleaned by fluorescence measurements. Okay, solvent accessibility of residues. Okay, so this is the fluorescence methods where exactly, let's say, certain residues at the core, how to know that how dynamic is a structure. So sometimes you add a fluorophore, or you take the existing fluorophores like phenylalanine or tyrosine or tryptophan, which are already present in native proteins, and then you add the quenchers to the solution, so that if quencher really bumps into this fluorophore, then it will quench. So that will tell you, for example, like how buried are these side chains, especially let's say tryptophans or tyrosines. Okay, how buried are they? If the quenching is to the highest extent, then it is completely exposed, and quenching is very, very minimal, then it is completely buried, but it could be partially quenched, then you know that it's basically the interface. So these kind of further experiments would only tell you more and more about your structural protein, which typically we see as a rigid structures, but these are not rigid at all. They are dynamic. The dynamics actually changes within a protein from site to site. Okay, it's not that uniform. Okay, sometimes if you have a large proteins, then you have what are multi-domains. Okay, multi-domains. So all these proteins which I have shown are single single domain globular proteins, means that more or less entire polypeptide chain forms one globule like round unit. But you can have proteins multi subunit, multi-domain protein. Then individual domains have a well-defined structure, but domain distance, domain orientation can change. But all these things can be nicely studied both experiments and simulations. Okay. Okay, so what we talked about tertiary structure, that's basically one protein. Okay, but occasionally you have many different proteins come together, form multimeric proteins. Okay, multimeric proteins as shown in hemoglobin here. In the hemoglobin, there are 4 myoglobin units come together and arranged in a certain orientation, giving rise to what's called hemoglobin. So there are 2 alpha type myoglobins and 2 beta type myoglobins come together, form a tetrameric, okay, the myoglobin called hemoglobin. Okay, so but this is very important for the function of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin will not be functional if all 4 units come together. Okay, so 3 units might not even form a structure, 2 might not even form, but all 4 together gives rise to a functional protein and these individual molecules are called subunits. Okay, so this is 4 units.
Sir,
And on the just a minute, let me finish. On the right side bottom is a dimeric unit, alcohol dehydrogenase. 2 identical molecules called alpha type come together, form a dimer. So this is actually a functional unit, means that when it functions, it dehydrogenases, it takes alcohol and then it converts to aldehyde. So this enzyme exists in native conditions as dimer, and then dimer functions. Okay, this hemoglobin, 4 myoglobinule molecules come together, form a tetrameric unit in a certain fashion. And the function of hemoglobin is actually very central to this assembly of 4 subunits in a specific orientation. So these are called quaternary structure. Okay, we are going beyond tertiary structure. Okay, one more example shown at the left bottom is microtubule. So microtubules are the polymeric molecules, okay, filamentous proteins, which are part of cytoskeletal elements, which I discussed: intermediate filaments, microtubule, and actin filaments. So microtubule elements, these are much large assembly. Okay, so you can't really fix a number. So these are so large that these filamentous, the filaments can be up to 50 to 100 nanometer long, and then it forms by what are called protofilaments. Okay, protofilaments are the linear aggregation of molecules, but these linear aggregates come together, 13 linear aggregates come together, form a cylindrical structure. Okay, so 13 protofilaments, and then each protofilament has actually 2 microtubule, tubulin proteins, tubulin alpha and tubulin beta. 2 proteins come together, form alpha beta unit. So those alpha beta units form protofilaments, linear filaments. These 13 filaments come together, form a cylindrical structure, and the center is hollow, diameter is about 50 nanometer. So these long filaments both give rigidity to the cell and also provide way for the cargo to be transported with the help of motor proteins using ATP chemical energy to convert it into mechanical energy. So this complex assembly, okay, of individual protein molecules is important sometimes for structural reasons in the case of microtubule, or functional reasons in the case of hemoglobin, or it could be for enzymatic catalysis as shown in alcohol dehydrogenase. Okay, what is the question?
Sir, in this context, what does alpha and beta signify? Because we understand alpha and beta in terms of secondary structures, but
No. So don't confuse with that. Okay, so
yeah, this is tertiary. Tertiary.
I'm not even sure tertiary. So
Okay.
these are quaternary structures. So you have to actually sometimes slightly different types of molecules. So myoglobin has a certain sequence. Okay, but we have actually looks like there are different types of myoglobin. There are slight changes in the amino acid content. Okay, so there's small change in the amino acid sequence coming from the genes. Okay, give rise to slightly different molecules, but more or less their sequences are very similar but slight differences. So if you see the hemoglobin, you have 4 myoglobin molecules. 2 are of the same type, 2 of the other type. Means that there's small changes in the amino acid. The small changes in the amino acid is actually very important.
Okay, so this is not.
This alpha is not alpha helix, beta is not beta strand. Alpha is alpha subunit, means that it has a well-defined protein sequence. That sequence is slightly different from the beta unit.
Okay, thank you.
And the same thing with microtubule, you have 2 slightly different tubulin molecules. Okay, differences in the sequence come together form. But in the alcohol dehydrogenase, it shows alpha 2, means that the same molecule forms dimer. Both are right.
Got it.
Okay, so let's go to a slightly larger scale. Okay, in this pandemic era, we should even discuss about much beyond quaternary structure. Okay, so beyond quaternary structure.
Sir, I have one question.
Yeah.
Sir, provided I have a primary sequence,
Hmm?
I'm not asking if you can predict it, but if the tertiary structure formed by the sequence unique.
Tertiary structure formed by the sequence is unique. Okay, so then we have to classify into 2 sections: folded proteins, and then proteins might not have a well-defined structure.
Oh, this.
Folded proteins. Folded typically you have, that's why it's called native state. So they have a well-defined structure. Okay, so it's impossible for me to think that two native basins almost equal energy separated by a barrier. It's not possible. So always they have a native base. Okay. Of course, proteins IDPs are totally different ball of game. Okay, so
Provided I have a tertiary structure. Is the tertiary structure unique to a sequence?
is a tertiary structure is unique to a sequence. Yes.
When
A given sequence, if it is folded, yeah, it has a unique tertiary structure.
no, but
Oh, a tertiary structure. No, but tertiary structures are diverse. Okay, so that's exactly what I showed you. I don't know why I came. Aditya, are you recording or not? Okay, somehow it doesn't show on my screen. Record. Okay, got it. Okay, so that's the world of proteins. These are different tertiary structures you can really think of.
yeah.
So what you're asking is that a given tertiary structure, let's say alpha helix bundle, is it unique to a sequence?
Yes.
No, many different sequences can form the same tertiary structure. Okay. Yeah, so, but how do you prove that? Let's say a given sequence formed a structure. Unless you find that structure by a different sequence, till that point of time, it's unique to that. But it's not possible. Okay.
But there are examples like it.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's why it's basically we call topology. Okay. Beta sandwich topology, alpha helix bundle, okay, etc., etc. So okay, so to complete this quaternary structure, I'm showing you a very complex example here. Okay, so assembly of a virus. So assembly of a virus is also considered kind of quote unquote quaternary structure, because how do you define quaternary structure? So you take different protein molecules, how they are actually arranged with respect to each other. Okay, in the microtubule, we know how exactly. So as long as you specify the parameters, it's a quaternary assembly. But in that sense, a viral organization is also quaternary assembly, because you know exactly the relative position of molecules. Okay, almost every atom you can really predict. Okay, that's the beauty of entire virus. So this is a tobacco mosaic virus called TME virus. So it's an RNA virus, just like our SARS-CoV-2. And it has a very interesting RNA molecule. So that's basically its genetic code, which actually injects into cells. And the name suggests, it actually affects tobacco plant. Okay, what does it have? It has a nice RNA. Okay, I don't remember exactly what is the sequence. A very fixed number of ribonucleic acids, and coated with protein. Okay, so this is called coat protein, shown in blue on the right side, which has 158 amino acids. Okay, shown in the what do you call, oval or oblong structure. So this coat protein, as the name suggests again, it coats nicely the RNA molecule. This is a 4 helix bundle. Okay, so these are the kind of names we use sometimes. 4 helix bundle means that it has 4 helices packed together in a certain arrangement called tertiary structure, and that's a structure. So each protein has that. So all these proteins actually coat nicely the RNA, and RNA forms a kind of helical structure here, and then the coat protein actually forms helical. So once you coat the one RNA molecule from, let's say, 5' to 3', you form a kind of rod structure. Okay, so the coat protein with RNA forms a rod, and you can really see that how long are these rods. Okay, and the diameter is about 18 nanometer, because protein is few nanometers, and then RNA, and you can actually see that RNA has very well defined structure. Its pitch is 2.3 nanometer. Basically, the coat proteins again coats 2.3 nanometer. Clearly see that even the diameter of this protein could be 2.3 nanometer. But this forms now on the RNA. RNA might be really long in this case, I guess. Okay, so that's why it is actually forming a rod structure, the entire TME, forming a rod structure consisting of this. This is again considered a quaternary structure because you have a well-defined arrangement of code proteins, of course, RNA acting as a template. Okay, so it's not purely purely protein aggregate, but it's basically RNA protein aggregate, similar to ribosome. So ribosome is such a complex machinery. So where you have ribosomal RNA and proteins come together, form either 50S, 30S, 20S, and then coming together forming 70S. So these are much larger quaternary structures, where we call quaternary structure because there is a well-defined arrangement of molecules. Intermolecular distance or intermolecular orientation is actually fixed. So that actually sums up protein structure. So we have nicely taken from the atomistic level of understanding what is phi-psi, to protein side chains, to secondary structural elements, and how you put together into tertiary structures, and then sometimes how actually you brought another level of complexity or richness into structure, into quaternary structures. And then I gave some examples how that might be important, either for structural reasons or for functional reasons. So next class, I'll stop here, and next class we'll talk about interactions, and then we'll see that a little bit of interactional energy, so that we learn more about properties of amino acid side chains, and then how inter-residue interactions and what kind of interactions gives rise to the structures which we have seen either in the secondary structure or tertiary or quaternary. Okay, so we'll stop here and then take
Sir, I have a question.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sir,
Go ahead.
what in a quaternary structure, what is the interaction mainly between different tertiary structures?
So it's not a fixed, you can't really write a table. It's basically mostly side chain interactions. Okay, so once you have secondary structural elements are formed. Okay, so you have tertiary structure, but now tertiary structure, what you see on the surface of individual molecules. Okay, what you might have is that basically a different well-defined coat of side chains, and then these side chains from one molecule interacting with the side chains of another molecule. Okay, either in a homopolymer model like alpha-2 alpha alcohol hydrogenase, or alpha-2 beta-2 in myoglobin. So now mostly it's side chain interactions.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
In different in hemoglobin, in different side chains interaction, like in the picture, I see that in the two portions of the interact with the other alpha helix, which are alpha tertiary structures. So I mean, want to say that
no, in hemoglobin, each subunit is interacting with the other subunit. There are 4 molecules. Every molecule interacts with the other 3.
okay. So I mean, want to say these interactions are so strong that they can hold them.
Oh yeah. So yes, hemoglobin is such a well-defined molecule, and this tetramer now forms nicely shown 2 colors. One is light blue, one pair, and another piece is dark blue. So each subunit is actually interacting with the other 3. And okay, so this is what I'm showing is a static structure. Okay, so when I talk about allostery, then I use this hemoglobin example a lot, because there is a lot of dynamics is actually happening. Okay, so there are slight rearrangement of the molecules with respect to each other is important, and this rearrangement occurs whether you have no oxygen molecule, or carbon dioxide, or sometimes carbon monoxide, and some other elements actually which again modulate. These are called allostery. Okay, it's not just hemoglobin is just binds oxygen or binds carbon dioxide. No, a lot of other molecules actually regulate the quaternary structure. So they are called relaxed state and the Ken state. Okay, okay, so there is a shift between these 2 states, through what is called allosteric interactions. Either all 4 domains want to be in relaxed state or all 4 want to be in tensile state. That's an important structural transition that actually dictates whether whether hemoglobin should bind oxygen or should release oxygen. Okay, so that we will talk about when I discuss allosteric.
So, sir, small question. So, sir, can we say that instead of interaction, can we say that there is some sort of a force that regulates the TANE state or the like?
What do you
instead
mean
of
force? So intermolecular force is we call interaction. Okay, so
Yes,
that's
but-
a different way of saying. That's the next class. So we talk about, okay, when we say the chemist interaction, means that you have a chemical functional group, you have another chemical functional group, and then what kind of intermolecular forces. Okay, let me put it like that. So next class I'll discuss about what are the different intermolecular interactions. Okay, what are the different types, and then their relative strength, and how that dictate secondary structure, tertiary and quaternary. Okay, these are central to everything, ligand binding to structural rigidity to enzymatic catalysis. Okay, any other question?
Sir, I have a question that in the last class we have seen that the beta strand structure, in the beta strand structure, the two subunits in the first term, so they cannot have handedness in the structure in beta strand. So when the beta strand pack to form the beta sheet, their planes are somewhat tilted. So can in the structure you have handedness any kind of?
Wait for your question, but what are you saying? The first 2 residues?
In the beta strand structure, we have seen that in part term there are 2 residues. So we cannot have a handedness in beta strands. They are n equal to 2 in beta strands. So when the beta strands pack to form a beta sheet, their planes are somewhat tilted. So can we have a handedness in the structure?
Yes. So that's what exactly. So this picture shows that you have a line showing 2, means that if your alpha, if your phi and psi falls on this line, okay, imagine if it falls on this line, then you don't have handedness. But
Yes,
the
sir.
moment you have off this line, okay,
Yes,
so
sir.
then actually you can really talk about handedness. So that's why parallel, if you see, I don't know exactly where they fall, but that's exactly how you will think about when I say handedness. So if let's say this phi size on this side, means
Yes,
that
sir.
handedness is, let's say in this case, right-handedness, and if it falls on this left-handed, so that's how actually you will think about it. Okay, but consistently on, let's say if you take a beta strand, okay, and if all phi size slightly below this line, then you actually get the handedness. Okay, that's true. That's true actually. I think for parallel beta sheet, that's actually shown. It's slightly below.
Yes,
So you can
sir.
see that what handedness actually involves. Okay, good question. Okay.
So that
Any other
means
question?
it won't be exactly zigzag. Can we say
No,
that?
it is zigzag, but the thing is that, so you can have now, okay, if it is a perfect, let's say linear, okay, it's like a scale, but now you can have that scale slightly twist, okay. So if you take that parallel scale, if you twist, okay, zigzag, but the twist is there. That twist is, you can really think of right-handed or left-handed. Okay, that small twist in the beta strand, which is not planar anymore. Okay, you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
Okay.
Zigzag is like a V type something.
Exactly. So that is zigzag. But the thing is that small twist you build, it's not planar structure now. It's not, a strand is not planar. But if you build a twist, so then
Yes, I get it. I get it. Yeah.
okay, good.
Sir,
Okay, Atish.
Hello, sir. I want to ask that if we do mutation for a protein, how Ramachandran plot we have to interpret?
Mutation. Well, imagine, let's say if you do a point mutation, for example,
Yes.
if it changes the structure a lot, okay, for some reason, okay, imagine, let's say you take a bulky side chain in the in the core, okay, which nicely packs. But now you create either two much larger bulky side chain or much smaller bulky chain called cavity mutant. Then the packing might not be identical, right? So then if you solve the structure for the wild type and the mutant, but if you map all phi and psi, okay, so then you might have small changes, okay. But otherwise, if the mutation doesn't really, imagine a side chain on the surface, if you make a mutation, maybe it doesn't really change the overall structure. So first of all, your phi psi will not change, tertiary structure will not change. But if it is at the core, then maybe they are not really packing together, okay. So then maybe small changes in the Ramachandran plot phi psi, but there might be more changes in the dynamics. So you have to really see that many different perspectives. Okay, it's not just saying my alpha, my phi psi on Ramachandran plot would tell me everything about the protein structure. No, only certain features that can tell you. That can tell you that allowed regions, not allowed regions, how refined are these elements. But it doesn't really tell you the dynamics. Dynamics is basically change in the movement of side chain, inter-side chain distances, and etc. in the protein.
Okay. In case of unfolding, we can thought about electrical unfolding or magnetic unfolding.
Okay, that's a good question. Yes, people have been using electric field. That's another way to modulate the unfolding, because you have what are called dipoles, right? Because, for example, like alpha helix, when I talked about there is a dipole. The longer the helix, because each peptide element gives you a small dipole along the axis. But if you have a longer helix, you have a larger dipole. Now, if you put this helix in electric field, it wants to orient in so that it actually neutralizes the force. But if you have a protein where, for example, like say myoglobin, you have helices, they are oriented differently. So either you disturb first the tertiary structure, basically so that all the helicals want to orient, so that you lose the interhelical arrangements, but then that's called denaturation. Okay, so it's possible that by applying electric field, one can actually denature. Ravi actually works computationally, is Anustup is doing some work. Okay, good. Any other questions?
Sir, I have a last question. Sir, so sir, I said that by the force that we say that in the alpha and the beta unit there is some interaction in between. So I want to say that there is some outer force that hold together the alpha and beta unit. Like if we take the hemoglobin moiety outside the cell, then it will destroy. Even the interaction between the alpha beta interaction will present. So I want to say that there is some kind of other outside force that hold the alpha beta unit together in the cell.
Now, what do you mean outside the cell? As long as, like I said, the physiological conditions means that if you have pH 7.4, if you have buffer to maintain the pH, because it's an aqueous medium, if you have right amount of salt, right temperature, then it's stable inside the cell or outside the cell. That's how actually we are able to do experiments. But the question what is important is that, do these molecules interact with other molecules? If those molecules are absent, then of course those interactions are absent. So then the state of the molecule will be different. But as long as it has its substrates, binding elements, sometimes they're floating, they're ready for binding something else. But if something else, ligand is not there, they're floating. Okay, so in that sense, if you maintain these conditions, these molecules are stable outside. That's the reason why we are able to do experiments in a controlled manner in most of these molecules by taking them out in conditions called in vitro, outside the cell in the test tube. Okay, unless there is a stabilizing element which is actually missing. Okay, for example, a protein is in the membrane. Okay, if you take out the membrane and put it in water, it's not stable. But even in vitro, you can actually build a membrane so that molecules actually embedded in membrane. So you can actually do experiments, and then these molecules are actually stable.
So actually, sir, this buffer, and the
okay, I think
also have a.
Sir, I would request you for something, sir. Since
who is talking?
Sanjeev, sir.
Okay.
Sir, these things are this terminology are very new to me, sir. So I am having difficulty to understand all these things in one go. So can I have a video of last two lectures too, and this one.
Oh yeah, so sorry. We will put the videos. Aditya. Okay, so what we can do is that maybe I think I'm going at the pace which I want. I think we are doing very well. So we have started October 15th, right? And it's not even November 15th. So we have finished 8 lectures. So that's a good pace despite doing only 2 lectures per week. I think we are doing good. So what we can do is that maybe after next class, we can have 2 classes only for clarifying doubts or something, so that we can have a little bit more discussion. You come up with questions so that which might be helpful maybe in a discussion mode. Okay, so I will not teach, but then I'll be open to discussion so that, and also you bring in some interesting material. Okay, I think we'll do that after next class. Maybe we'll take 2 classes, or at least 1 class discussion, and then we'll see. Okay.
Yes, sir. Aditya, sir, are these videos are on main channel, sir?
YouTube. I'm sorry.
YouTube. Okay.
Yeah. So WhatsApp. Are you in WhatsApp group?
Yeah, I am there.
So Aditya is actually posting links to those, and if you go to that site, you have this.
I got a link up to 5 lectures, but after that I haven't.
No, they should be there. Okay, if they're not there, we'll post by evening, and also I'll post these slides on Google Drive.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, someone in the chat. Audio chat. Okay, can you send the slides? We'll post the slides. Okay. Okay, thank you. And yeah, so Friday we'll take another class. Okay, bye-bye.